Welcome back to the show. Make our picks in the 5 o'clock hour. Want to just put a bow on everything that happened at the GM meetings, and who better to talk to than our good friend Buster Olney joins us now on the show. Buster, Michael, Don, and Peter, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm not sick because I was not at the general manager meeting. I talked to so many people who were there with teams who coming out of that, they're taking counts of how many in their traveling parties got really ill. It was probably a good idea to stop it when they did.
So let's talk about the big story that came out of it. And because you covered the Yankees for the New York Times. You are very familiar with the way things work. Were you surprised at the way Brian Cashman went at defending himself?
I was, and I will tell you this. When I saw it initially, I was like, "Oh boy!" And it surprised me because it reminded me of when Brian said, in I think it was spring training this year. It might have been 22. When he basically came out and said and criticized the Astros of 2017 and said, essentially we should have been champions, but the Astros cheated. And when I heard that, I was like, who are you trying to convince? Like, there's nobody who's actually going to change their mind about what happened. And that's kind of how I felt the other day, all the people who are standing in front of him, Yankee fans, they're not going to change their minds about what happened in 2023. And then I talked to other people in the organization, and their feeling was that what Brian was doing was essentially trying to, get the backs of the people who work for him and say, hey, you know what? We believed in what we had going into 2023, and we feel like, and I know, Michael, you've talked to enough people in the organization, they feel like they got hammered by injuries and the lack of performance, and they feel good, generally speaking, about the organization going forward. I think that's what Brian was trying to do. He was trying to get the backs of the people. I'm not defending what he said. I'm just saying I think that's probably what his perspective was.
But here's one of the points I made yesterday. I want to see if you feel that way. I think Brian, for the most part, in New York, the big-time columnists, national guys like you, I think we've all defended Brian. We think that Brian is an outstanding GM. So who is he talking to? The Twitter mob? Radio talk show callers? Who's he addressing there?
Well, I actually think in some respects he's addressing his own people who worked within the organization, who have, for 2 months, heard conversations about, is this guy going to get let go? Is it going to be massive change? And I think he's trying to bolster the backs of the people in the organization. As they say, it surprises me that that when he did it, because I don't think he's going to convince anybody, but I think that's what the aim was.
But I'm not saying you're wrong, Buster. You're probably 100% right. I don't understand the logic. Nobody knows who these people are. Like, he is the face of this organization when it comes to the decision-making. The fans are killing Brian. They don't know any of the analytic people, any of the people behind the scenes. They all work for him. They're all hired by him anyway. Why would he embarrass himself, use profane language, get the fan base against him to defend people that nobody really even knows who they are?
Well, and I think my guess is that it's because of the broad strokes of conversation that happened in August and September and early October of, okay, there needs to be massive change. There needs to be, they need to change this department. They need to change the analytics department. They need to change this. And my guess is that he's basically saying, I got your back to those people in the way that he did it. Now, again, I wouldn't have done it that way. I think if you're not going to be able to convince the people that you're talking to in that case, which is essentially the media and Yankee fans, then I don't really necessarily see a point of it. But I have been around him long enough to know that that's a decent chance he was essentially speaking to his own people.
All right, and the people you've spoken to, do you believe that Soto will be traded before the season?
Absolutely.
You do?
100% he's going to be traded before the season. No, that's one where, A.J. Preller and Scott Boras come out and said, no, that's not going to be the case. All you have to do is look at the math. If, in fact, the Padres are going to get their payroll down to $200 million to $220, which would be a massive reduction they're going to have to make a move with Soto. And it makes sense that they would do that, given the other assets that they have and the fact you can't trade Manny Machado with his contract. You can't trade Xander Bogaerts with his contract. Yu Darvish, Joe Musgrove. Those are massive contracts that just can't be moved. So I do think Soto's going to be moved. People who are in other front offices absolutely believe the Padres are going to trade Soto. And he, to me, if you're trying to map out a potential Yankees offseason, he, to me, is the most logical target because he's not going to necessarily require a big deal. And, he's someone who would have an immediate impact, balance out their offense. The big question is going to be the adjustment period if, in fact, he goes to New York because, as we saw when he was traded to the Padres, it took him a little while to get comfortable there.
I will repeat something I've said before, Buster. Everybody, even in our business, celebrating when the Padres were spending all that money. And I said, it's not sustainable in that market. Even if they sell out every game, they're going to fall short. And then they got hurt by the regional sport network going down, and they lost $50 million there. There's no way they can sustain that in San Diego, Buster. I mean, you covered the Padres, you know.
And that's what you just said is exactly the perspective of people in other front offices. And they weren't, trying to knock what the Padres had done. They're just looking at the numbers and saying the math doesn't make any sense. Now, I will tell you, I've had that conversation with Peter Seidler. When they started to get aggressive in 2022, he's the Padres owner. When I had that conversation with him, his feeling was, you know what, we'll be fine. And we'll be okay. We saw last year that they, had massive attendance. They had a waiting list. So he has his perspective. The perspective of people with other teams who crunch the numbers and they look where the Padres are, they don't get it, and they don't think it's sustainable, to your point. And that's why, Kevin Acee of the San Diego Union Tribune wrote 6 weeks ago that they were going to be looking to reduce their payroll. You would assume that some of the sources on that story probably were minority owners within the organization saying, hey, we got to get back to being a little bit sane in how we run our team financially.
So how big is the pool, or how deep is the pool of teams that can get Soto?
Well, and that's a great way to ask it because, first off, you have to have prospects to get him. Let's face it, the Padres are going to get 40 cents in the dollar for what they paid for him because he's now a year from free agency. He's a Scott Boras client. And there'll be a lot of teams that'll look at it and say, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give up prospects and then see the guy walk away potentially at the end of the year. Look, it reminds me so much of the Mookie Betts situation a few years ago. He obviously one of the best players in baseball, but in the end, the Red Sox didn't have a lot to choose from because a lot of teams checked out. Their feeling was, we're not going to give up the prospects and pay the massive contract. And so people have criticized the Red Sox for not getting that much. I don't think they had a lot of teams that interested in Mookie. It's that close to free agency. So I can't tell you, exactly, how long that list is, but I don't think it's very long. And I think the Yankees, that's where potentially the Yankees could make a deal similar to what the Dodgers did and not necessarily giving up a ton for a player who's really valued.
Who gets Yamamoto? A betting site put out that the Mets would be the favorite, the Dodgers second, and the Yankees third. How do you look at it?
Well, and who knows when the numbers actually go down. When the Yankees signed CC Sabathia, as you guys know, they bid 161. Next closest team was the Angels at 100. What I hear from agents who just were at the general manager meetings, they think the Mets are going to be aggressive and do something big. They laugh at the notion that the Mets are going to, retrench and take some time to come back, and they do think that they're going to be big players with him. I'm sure you guys have talked about the Dodgers starting pitching situation. It's a disaster. Julio Urias is a free agent, and he probably, when he comes back, he's going to have to serve a long suspension for the domestic violence situation. Kershaw out indefinitely. No one knows if he's going to pitch again, up and down the line. So they absolutely need a starting pitcher, and they do have financial flexibility. And even if, in fact, they are the team that's going to be number one in pursuing Ohtani, he's not going to help them in that regard next year. And I'd say this about Brian Cashman: when he gets into situations where the team has its back against the wall, time after time after time, his reflex is pitching, pitching, pitching. It was Sabathia in 2000 after 2008. It was Garrett Cole later. So I think if you're Yamamoto, you're in a hell of a position as a 25-year-old free agent pitcher to have those three teams bidding on.
Does it concern you? Because I've been reading this a lot lately. It almost makes me think of when the NFL Combine, they measure, hand size, that this guy's too short to be a great pitcher. I guess he's 5'10", and there haven't been that many great short pitchers. What is that a concern among Major League Baseball GMs?
It is generally, through the years, the conversations you hear about the Dodgers and the Yankee staffs they like to collect really big guys. Tanaka was not like some massive guy. He was certainly bigger than Yamamoto was. Pedro Martinez wasn't such a bad pitcher. I suspect that this will be a case where, right, 100%. So I think this is going to be a case more where the need is going to drive the price on him, and the Yankees need him, the Mets need him, the Dodgers need him.
I wanted to get your thoughts on what happened with Counsell and the Mets. Were the Mets used by Counsell, or did they just misread the room? Or both?
I think they potentially, first off, I can tell you this. Other managers are throwing a party for Craig Counsell because they have been so frustrated and angry about where manager salaries have been going over the last 20 years. To think that, the salary that the Brewers offered Craig Counsell 16 years after Joe Torre left the Yankees was $1 million less than what Torre made in his last year with the Yankees is, in the minds of, a lot of managers, is ridiculous. I think the Mets, probably their one chance would have been to outbid the rest of the field, kind of like I was saying about the Yankees and Sabathia. They probably needed to blow away all the other teams. I don't know what the offer was from the Mets to Counsell, but as you guys know, the offer that the Cubs gave him was about 50% higher than what the Brewers offered him.
But one thing, though, Buster, you mentioned the 16 years. Everybody knows that they have devalued a manager. He's a middle manager 100%. Now. So and the baseball GMs did that where they were the power brokers and they made the most money. So that's why GMs around baseball probably incensed at what the Cubs did.
100%, and it's going to be fascinating to see what happens the next couple of years, because I talked with managers, guys who are Craig Counsell's peers in the aftermath of that deal the other day, and more of them are like, you know what, the hell with this. We're going to do what Counsell did. We're going to go to free agency, and we are going to try to push the numbers in the way that he did. And Michael, you're right. In the aftermath of Moneyball, the feeling was that the manager was no more important than a White House spokesperson, and that the real power was in the baseball Oval Office. And the manager's salaries have come down and been incredibly depressed. Well, now, in recent years, when you've seen the experienced managers win the World Series, Dave Roberts in 20, Snitker in 21, Dusty Baker in 22, Bruce Bochy in 23, the feeling among the managers is, no, we're more important than the White House spokesperson. A manager said to me the other day, it's much more like a CEO, where we're responsible for the culture. We're out there representing the company twice a day, every day for 7.5 months. I absolutely believe that you're going to see, next fall when, Skip Schumacher of the Marlins, Alex Cora, Aaron Boone, other guys, their contracts will expire. And then the year after that, Bruce Bochy, there's a few others that expire. I think you're going to see more managers get to free agency and say, I'm going to find out what my actual value is in the marketplace.
All right, one final thing. We have a minute. Where's Ohtani end up? Do you believe the rumors that he does not want to play on the East Coast and the Dodgers a heavy favorite for him?
Yes. All of the above, yes. In the end, he went through the bidding process the first time, and a lot of the teams that were involved felt like that they were kind of used and duped, and that all along he wanted to play on the West Coast in warm weather And at that time, his preference might have been to go to the Dodgers, but they didn't have access to DH at that time. They do now. And what I've been told is by people in the Dodger organization, Andrew Friedman, head of baseball ops there, is the word that was used to me was obsessed with Ohtani. And that's a franchise that has the ability with other stars, with Betts and Freeman, to give him the coverage to say, look, we don't need you to go and talk to sponsorship people, and we don't need you to do your thing or do anything more than just go and be the best hitter and be the best pitcher you can. And I believe that's where he's going to go.
Great stuff, Buster. As always, have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, guys. Always fun to talk.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely.
Bye, Buster.
Great stuff from Buster. So he thinks definitely that Soto's getting traded. And the Yankees want to change the narrative? You get Juan Soto. You've changed the narrative. Everything that happened in 2023 is forgotten, forgiven, and season ticket sales will go through the roof, and the games will be watched with great interest on yes. That's a game changer. That's a needle mover. But the Mets also would want him as well. Be interesting to see who gets him if he is indeed traded. There's something that came out earlier in the week regarding the Knicks that really made me think. And I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But first, Peter's going to tell us about FanDuel.